WCW Mayhem is a game that I got for Christmas way back in the late 90s. I think around the time that the game came out, but I could be wrong about that. I didn't know too much about WCW at the time. My friends and I were way more into WWF, and I only really heard about WCW near the end of the NWO storyline. I did know a few of the wrestlers, mostly when they came over to the WWF, and one of my friends, I think, pointed out, oh, they used to be on WCW, or maybe I caught them when I would occasionally watch WCW Thunder. Yes, that was my entry point for WCW. Nothing really crazy, pretty bad, and yeah. I actually really like WCW Mayhem. It isn't as good as the Smackdown games, but I kind of like it. Looking at it now, I think the controls are decent, the graphics are decent, and it has a pretty big roster. It's a fun game, even though it still has a lot of flaws, and I would really rather play the Smackdown games, because I just think that there's more depth to those games than there is to this one. Like a lot of the wrestling games from the 90s, there's no story mode in WCW Mayhem. However, you do have a mode where you try to work your way through the ranks and are basically chasing the different championships. Once you get one of them, whether it's the television championship, the cruiserweight title, US title, or the world heavyweight title, then you can defend that for a little bit and then move on to the next tier. It's not great, but it is something at least. It is kind of fun to take one of the wrestlers that WCW just did not care about and try to make them into the world champion, especially if it's one of the characters that's kind of become a meme over the past few years, or that people have gone back and, have a better appreciation for what they did back in the 90s. It's cool that you can do that, especially since WCW really didn't seem all that interested in making new stars. They just kind of wanted to grab people who fans remembered from the 80s and just keep running those people into the ground and not really giving you any new matches. I'm sorry, I've been watching a lot of WCW, so I'm just watching the whole company kind of fall apart, so that's kind of coloring my attitude towards really them as a company and a lot of what they did. In some ways, this game feels like just a fighting game that's been given a coat of paint and made into a wrestling game. You work your way up through different tiers, kind of like a Mortal Kombat game, except for you're not killing anyone. And yeah, you're sort of left on your own to make up your own storyline with this. It can be a fun way of doing things, or it can be really annoying. Parts of the game are really awesome, and parts aren't, and I kind of wish that there was a story mode in here to give you a little bit more, especially if you're just playing this by yourself. The gameplay here is pretty good. The controls are really easy to learn, and there are a lot of wrestling moves that you can pull off, and a bunch of wrestlers that you can unlock. The game has fairly long loading times, but that was pretty standard for the time. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, it would not have been that big of a deal. The game modes at first feel pretty standard. You have just a quick game, you have a main event, and then you have the quest for the best, which is you going through all the different challenges to win all the different belts. There's a lot going on, and even though you're just kind of doing the same thing over and over, it is still a lot of fun. There are 2-player modes, there's a lot of stuff you can do in this game, but there's just something that is holding it back from being as good as the Smackdown games. The controls are relatively easy to understand. When I started, it felt like there was just a limited number of moves, like you could only do a few things and everybody had the same moves. But as I kept playing, I learned how to do more of them. It's a really easy game to wrap your mind around, and it's pretty fun to just go through the different button combinations and do whatever move you really want. You're not really limited to anything, honestly, when you play this. The game can be a little awkward at times, but it's still a pretty solid wrestling game from the 90s. There's no health bar for the wrestlers. This felt a little odd to me at first, but it isn't the worst thing about the game. This bar on the bottom screen that lets you know how well you're doing. You've got all these different colored tiles. Once you fill it up, a little outline will kind of flash around it, and that'll let you know that you can do your finisher. You'll also get a finish him on the screen as well. It's pretty great when you do something like this. It does work out pretty well, but it's a little awkward not having a health bar. At least it was to me. You can also see when the wrestlers are fatigued, they'll kind of slump their shoulders a little bit and breathe a little heavy. That's pretty fun to see because it lets you know, hey, I'm beating the crap out of this guy, or this match has gone on for a while. Every once in a while, there will be a run-in during your match. These make the game annoying, but they're pretty easy to handle. Eventually, the other wrestler will just leave. It's very odd, and I'm not really sure what it adds to the game. It's just sort of random. Somebody will run down, attempt to beat you up, or just stand there awkwardly, and then after a few minutes, they'll realize, oh, this isn't where I'm supposed to be, or I'm not supposed to be in this match, and then he'll just fuck off and go back up the rampway. It's bizarre when it happens. It might make sense if this was tied into a storyline, but there are no storylines in this game, and they just feel very random and unnecessary. It makes sense, I guess, when you compare it to what was going on in WCW at the time, where just nothing made any sense and it was kind of stupid. But maybe that's me thinking that there's a degree of realism in this game that just isn't there. Overall, I like the gameplay quite a bit. This is a nice alternative to the Smackdown games. I still prefer the Smackdown games to Mayhem, but Mayhem is a pretty fun game. There isn't too much to complain about when you're looking at the gameplay. The controls are pretty solid, and everything works the way you should expect it to. The graphics are pretty decent with this. The wrestlers look okay for the time. The arenas look okay. The camera can occasionally feel like somebody gave a kid a bunch of pixie sticks and sort of moves around a lot when it really shouldn't, or doesn't necessarily need to. They're trying to add some cinematics to the game, but for me it just sort of felt annoying at times when the camera would shift perspectives and whatnot. It wasn't too bad, but it got a little irritating. The audience looks horrible. Instead of having some recognizable people, there's just this mosaic of random garbage that is supposed to be the fans. It just doesn't look good. I can't remember how I felt about this back in the late 90s or early 2000s, but looking at it now, I'm not really sure what they were going for. It just looks like a mess of crap. I know this shouldn't be the focus of the game. You're supposed to be focused on the wrestlers, and that looks good, but when they show the audience, it's like, wow, that looks like trash. The wrestlers are, for the most part, given generic entrances. You do see them do some animations of their kind of signature entrances. So you've got Alex Wright dancing, you might have Buff Bagwell doing his entrance, and yeah, those look good, but then you see what they're trying to pass off as pyrotechnics, and that just sort of looks awful. During the entrances, the characters will stop, they'll do their entrance stuff, their little dances and poses and whatnot, and the pyrotechnics will just kind of pop out of the stage. They either look like a series of fountains shooting up different colored water, or they look like smoke. And none of it really looks that great now. Maybe I was impressed with it back in, the late 90s, early 2000s, but looking at it now and going back and playing this and seeing this same entrance over and over, it's annoying when you see that. There's no real variety to the pyrotechnics aside from color changes or swapping between a piss fountain, for lack of a better term, and something blowing up smoke. It's not very good. Not every wrestler gets these intros. I've noticed that a few of the cruiserweights just don't get an intro at all. I'm not really sure if that's a good thing or not, because you get to see less of that same intro that is very repetitive. So, yeah, I'm not really sure how to feel about it when there's no entrance. The different sets for the pay-per-views and also for the television shows are shown, and those are pretty great. So you get to see the Super Brawl entrance, the Thunder, the WCW Nitro entrance. Those are kind of fun, and getting to see the different arenas is great. The different ways that they've tried to break the game up a little bit is pretty cool. So yeah, that's kind of fun. Overall, the visuals are kind of what you should expect from a late 90s or an early 2000s wrestling game. It probably looked pretty good for the time. The crowd and the pyrotechnics are the only things that I can say are really bad about the visuals. Everything else is pretty good. And, oh yeah, occasionally the camera will try to get all cinematic. Like, what are you trying to do exactly? It looks good sometimes, other times it just isn't all that great. And that's pretty much what I could say about this game. This might be a case of nostalgia talking, but I really like WCW Mayhem. It's one of the few WCW games I played in the 90s, and it got me interested in checking out some of their other TV shows besides Thunder, because I just checked out Thunder whenever I was bored on a Thursday waiting for Monday Night Raw. I don't think I was skipping back and forth between between Nitro and Raw at this point. It does control pretty well, and there are quite a few characters to unlock, but I was a little disappointed with some of the visuals in the game. This was a fun game to revisit. I remember having fun with it during a Christmas holiday, but I went right back to Smackdown after I kind of grew tired of it. Playing it now was pretty fun, and I kind of remember having fun with it back then, but I also remember liking Smackdown a lot more, much like I do today. The graphics and the gameplay are good. The entrances were probably really cool back then, but now when I look at them, yeah, there's quite a few issues with it, mostly with the pyro and just how repetitive it gets as you go through this game. At the time of recording this, I would say I like Power Move Wrestling more than this one, but not much. Mayhem looks better than that game, but there's something that this is missing that Power Move had, and I can't really put my finger on it. It's a fun game, but I would still rather be playing Smackdown. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.